Hello, everyone. My name is Helen Davis, and this is my War and the Human Experience presentation. Um, I wanted to talk about the definition of the war. War is something that we usually consider an armed conflict between the nations or within a government, something that involves um, fighting, soldiers, explosions, violent actions, but it can look different. The war also exists within the homes, individuals, and relationships. It's not just an armed conflict, it's a multi layered human experience. My perspective on the definition of the war isn't just shaped by the academic sources that I've used and the classes that I've taken in the past, but it also um, comes from my experience as a social services worker, as an immigrant who is navigating the systems, as a person who is struggling with mental health, and someone who witnessed how the systems can both support and harm individuals. Some broader definitions of the war and the categories of it. It can look like internal war, psychological for someone who struggles with mental health issues, um, navigating the system within different clinics and hospitals. Also, a person who is fighting addiction. And there's a really good movie called The Four Good Days, and it portrays the life of a person who's struggling with addiction and how it impacts family relationships. Specifically, this one is between the mother and the daughter. Um, and how they navigate sobriety and issues um, with sobriety, the systems, the clinics, and relationship within the family. Another good one is the identity conflicts, which we can see in movies like The Joker or the book by Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazovs. Um, Another type of war is interpersonal war, something like family violence or child and parent conflicts. A good example of that would be a book by Christine Hanna called The Great Alone, where a father comes from a war and develops mental health issues, PTSD, and he brings that war home within the family. So they navigate that kind of conflict and try to build peace within the family. Then there is systemic wars. Examples of those can include racism, colonization, immigration struggles. For racism, for example, there is a really good book called The Nickel Boys and Underground Railroad, where it shows how racism is not just an individual choice. It is also rooted in systems, different systems like housing, education, even the reform type of facilities. For example, in the Nickel Boys, um, it's a facility in, I believe it was in Florida, um, for youth that didn't go to jail but went to this reformatory school. But it was deeply rooted in racism, and it was not a fair treatment, and it was not about healing, it was more about control and power. Then, of course, there is a physical war. And this we can see in a lot of different movies. For example, there is a really good classical movie almost called The Platoon. It shows the conflict on the battleground and in the trenches of the war. Another good book is by Kristen Hanna, The Women, which describes how nurses and women played a role in the Vietnam War. um, something that we didn't really talk about after it ended. The book also describes the emergence of PTSD and how the society didn't know what that was. It wasn't really known. Nobody knew the symptoms and where they were coming from, and how the veterans were struggling with it, causing conflict with themselves and the society that didn't understand them, and how the war affected them. Another good one is a movie called 20 Day in Mariupol and Bucha. These are the two movies, documentaries that describe and show firsthand experience in the Ukrainian and Russian war. It's got real life footage firsthand, and it includes regular people and people, like doctors who navigate their life and helping their fellow people, their citizens, um, despite being constantly under bomb attacks. Um, Also, war doesn't just happen, it is produced, normalized, and sometimes even glorified. We can see that in such movies like The Top Gun, for example, which kind of makes the war seem as something heroic, as something, um, to be proud of, something to volunteer and participate in, uh, something that shows the youth, encourages them to participate in a conflict and enlist, because that's the life that the soldiers experience. And if we contrast it with the platoon, uh, we can see big differences, because in the platoon movie, it shows what the armed conflict looks like, and that it is not something heroic and brave. It is those who are with less power fighting for those who have the power. Also, wanted to talk about the patriarchy and power. There is a good book called The Radical Awakening. It is talking about the patriarchal systems, and how they create dominance hierarchies, where control, aggression, and suppression are normalized. In the book, it describes how women are expected to be submissive and control their emotions, submit to the power. And the book also provides guidance on how to break from that stereotype and what we need to do as individuals, and society to change that. Also, with religion and politics, which I draw the example from the book The Wild Faith. Um, when religion merges with politics, it becomes a political power that is justifying control, exclusion, and conflict. Um, it creates the us versus them mentality. Moral superiority leads to conflict escalation, and this is not the religion that we see within communities. It's more of extremism type of religion that justifies killing other people, and encourages creating conflict and dominance over other nations, in the name of good, as they put it. Uh, Also, want to talk about the capitalism and military power. This is about the military-industrial complex that turns the conflict into profit, when we develop new weapons. It drives the economy at the cost of human lives. Also, the scientific innovation can be used for destruction, and we can see that in movies like Oppenheimer. Um, if you haven't seen the movie, it shows the event of a scientist who developed the nuclear bomb, and how it changed the conflict. Um, from my course in social psychology, I learned how people conform and obey to authority and how they internalize group norms. The course talked about the cult behavior, group polarization, and dehumanization. It was a very interesting course, and it led me to a lot of introspect and understanding of the opposite side of the conflict that we usually tend to push aside and just mark them as they're wrong and I'm right. But taking that course helped me understand what drives the opposite side's behavior and why people do what they do, why they make the choices that they make, and how those choices are impacted not just by the individual beliefs, skills, and norms and culture, but also how the society affects all of that. And when it's combined together, it can turn into polarization between two groups. From my personal and social worker perspective, I've seen the conflict from within the systems, working with the systems and with the individuals who navigate those systems. When it comes to especially marginalized population that live in poverty, have housing instability, mental health issues, and addiction, um, those systems more often than not create very rigid rules. So, for someone, for example, already struggling with mental health issues and experiencing homelessness, it becomes a lot harder to navigate those systems because they might it might be very difficult for them to keep a schedule that they need to attend or remembering um, different dates and appointments that they need to attend, filling out forms that are often very complex and puts them on wait lists that eventually lead to nowhere. Um, we can also talk about the war in individuals, something that that is basically within all of us because all of us are fighting some sort of war within ourselves. But I've worked with a lot of individuals whose lives were shaped by trauma, neglect, and systems that failed them. One of one of really good movies that I can provide as an example would be The Joker. Basically, it shows how individuals with mental health issues are pushed aside by the society and what happens when we neglect those individuals and when we dehumanize them. We can also see that in immigration war, especially right now in this current political climate. Um, I have worked with refugees in the past. I've worked with Ukrainian refugees and Afghanistan refugees. And it's really sort of ironic to hear people praise immigrants as hardworking, but then at the same time creating almost impossibly to navigate systems. They make it really hard and expensive to be able to obtain those right documents that can lead to eventually citizenship. Sometimes those paths don't even exist. Um, it's it has a list of very limited options in order to immigrate correctly, um, as people say. Then there is mental health war. Mental health is often a war that is invisible. People don't see it because it's internal. People with depression can look happy. Um, they can use humor. And, they can cheer up other people, but within themselves, they're fighting the war with their own personality, with their own emotions and their own trauma. Um, if I would reimagine a worldview and society that moves away from that conflict, I think we need to reimagine multiple sections of person's life and societies. I think we need to start from childhood. Um, we need to include trauma informed environments for the children, so they can grow up not in military conflicts or family conflicts, but they can feel safe and form secure attachments. Um, provide them with emotional education, how to regulate those emotions, and how to seek help. Um, the war within relationships can be reimagined where we move away from control towards partnership between the spouses or partners, um, where we eliminate the roles of female versus male, um, or dominant partner versus submissive partner, where one has to tend to the household chores and the other provides the financial stability and holds that financial power. When it comes to the conflict with the gender roles, again, I would bring the example of the book The Radical Awakening, by a psychology doctor, um, where she rejects the rigid expectations and supports autonomy of the individual. If I reimagine the daily life of the conflict, um, I think the book, The Negotiating Alchemy and Holding These Truths, provides a pretty good guideline and examples of how we can mitigate the conflict in a peaceful way, instead of participating in the conflict and making it worse, where we fight for control over one another. And instead of obtaining authority over one another, we can use things like active listening, where we can try to understand the opposite part, the opposite group, and understand their point of view and what drives them, what is their motivation, and to come up with solutions that would satisfy both parts, and not just create dominance of one group over the other. When it comes to the systems, we need to invest in mental health, especially in mental health in marginalized communities. and communities that have harder access to mental health. We need to reduce inequality and move towards not equality but equity, because not everyone needs the same type of resources and skills to reach self sufficiency. They need the ones that um, will specifically help them achieve self sufficiency. So if one thing is good for one person, it might not be good for the other. We also need to center around human dignity and stop dehumanizing other individuals, um, especially if they're different from us culturally, geographically. Um, we need to stop separating and polarizing groups, cultures within the country, within their own nations. I think it's a pretty good example in the current times where we are extremely polarized and basically divided into red versus blue, which only creates more conflict and violence. And we need to have more sympathy and humanity in order to understand each other and try to find a common solution, utilizing active listening to reach common benefits. So, in the conclusion, I want to say that war is something that doesn't just happen far away. It's something that happens and exists in the systems, relationships, and within ourselves. Um, but I also can say that the peace is also, it's not something that is given. It's not something that already exists. We can build it, we can learn it and normalize it, just like what is happening with the conflict now. It is normalized. The same can be true for peace. And my worldview on this is true peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice, empathy, and accountability. We also need to listen to the victims and help them achieve justice, um, and not just any type of justice, but a just justice, um, where we can bring back the equilibrium within those victims and within societies that experienced conflict, and the ones that had that conflict brought onto them. Um, there are multiple examples from negotiating alchemy, um, that doesn't just cover the United States, it covers topics internationally. It provides examples of different conflict resolutions from different cultures, how they address it, what worked, what didn't work. Uh, and I think it's a pretty good guideline to use, not only within political systems and cultural wars, but also within individuals, within ourselves, and within society. Um, those examples can help us create new guidelines and new ways on how to build peace and move towards peaceful negotiations, instead of control and creating power dynamics when one group is becomes an authority over the other group. Thank you. Um, this is the end of my presentation.